They say the wind remembers what we forget. Out in the vast emptiness of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter of Arabia, there are no voices, no markers, no memory of men, just wave after wave of wind-sculpted sand, shifting endlessly, hiding secrets older than time. But the Bedouin remember. They speak in low voices by firelight of a city that once stood, where now there is nothing. A city of high towers and ivory gates, of riches so great the merchants had to weigh their spices against gold. Its name was Ubar, or Iram, the city of pillars, a place so decadent, they say, that even the heavens turned their eyes away. For centuries, many believed it to be a myth, a warning wrapped in parable told in the Quran itself. Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with Ad of Iram, the city of lofty pillars, the like of which was never built in the land? And yet, in 1992, a satellite passed over the desert and caught something strange beneath the sand. A forgotten road, a radial pattern like spokes of a wheel hidden beneath centuries of dust. Expedition followed expedition, and soon they unearthed the ruins of a city, one that matched the legend in both name and nature. But let's step back and listen carefully. Let's trace the whispers. Before the fall, Ubar was no ordinary outpost. It was the beating heart of the incense trade. Frankincense and myrrh bled from the trees of Dhofar, carried by caravan to the empires of Rome, Egypt, and Persia. The world's breath of worship, prayer, and embalming passed through Ubar's gates. And with wealth came arrogance. The city, it said, was ruled by a line of kings descended from the tribe of Ad, giants of men, mighty in strength, cruel in heart. They built towers that touched the sky and walls polished smooth as glass. Their arrogance grew with their fortunes. They turned from humility. They mocked the stars, and the sands watched. One night the wind shifted. A storm unlike any before rolled across the dunes, howling, seething, unrelenting. It did not pass in a day, nor in a week. Some say it lasted a full generation. When it finally calmed, there was no trace of Ubar. No pillar, no gate, just sand and silence. For centuries only legend remained. The city that angered God, the Atlantis of the desert. But the ground holds memory better than the tongue. Beneath layers of sediment, archaeologists uncovered collapsed foundations, Wells' bones. Cursed or not, Ubar had lived and died. Its demise likely caused not by wrath, but by overuse. The well collapsed into an underground cavern. Without water, the city died, buried by time and myth. And yet, can we be certain? Why does the local sand seem heavier where Ubar once stood? Why do compasses spin near the ruins? And why do those who camp nearby speak of hearing voices in the wind? Perhaps the story is not finished. Perhaps cities do not vanish. They wait. Before the silence, before the sand swallowed stone, there were towers, pillars, that reached like fingers toward a merciless sun. The city of Ubar did not rise overnight. It grew in the dry cradle between dunes forged by caravans and consecrated by trade. From the southern hills of Dhofar, the lifeblood of its fortune was drawn frankincense, bled drop by drop from ancient boswellia trees. More precious than gold, the resin burned in temples from Jerusalem to Rome, its smoke a stairway to the gods. Every empire wanted it. Every king needed it, and so they came to Ubar. The city became a nexus, a crossroad, where wealth, religion, and ambition met. Camel caravans stretched for days along dust-ridden paths, arriving in the shadow of high walls and polished gates. And above it all, the towers, 14 tall columns rising in symmetry, said to gleam white under the full moon. The city knew no rival in the south. Its rulers, descendants of the Ad tribe, were hailed as kings and feared as tyrants. They took titles not just of men, but of stars and storms. They adorned themselves in dyed silks, painted their hands in gold dust, and carved the words of the wind into stone. And with each tribute collected, with each foreign envoy bent in supplication, their pride grew. The chief of Ubar, in its last golden age, was a man named Shaddad. His name whispered with equal parts awe and dread. He fancied himself the builder of a paradise, one that would rival the gardens of Eden. He ordered marble hauled from far lands' pools, built with silver linings, and shaded courtyards filled with perfumes and birds from beyond the sea. But Shaddad's city was not a place of peace. His rule was harsh. Those who defied his taxes were left to die in the desert, their tongues pulled for lies, and their bones left for the wind. It is said that once when a prophet passed through the land and warned of divine wrath, Shaddad laughed and doubled the height of his towers. "The gods build nothing man cannot rival," he said, "but even stone has ears." The people of Ubar, drunk on riches and isolated in their power, grew detached from the world that fed them. The wells that once were sacred were overdrawn. The caravans began to whisper of rebellion, of exhaustion, of dread. But no one listened. The pillars still stood. The frankincense still burned. The gods were silent, at least for a time, because pride, like towers, can only rise so high before they cast shadows. Even the sun cannot chase away. At first it was just the wind, a shift in its song, subtle but wrong. It no longer howled like it once did across the dunes, playful and hollow. Instead it whispered, slow, steady, like breath drawn through teeth. The traders noticed first. Men of the road always do. They spoke of mirages that lingered too long, of caravan trails that turned back on themselves. Some swore the stars were shifting, no longer guiding as they once had. Others claimed to have seen shadowed figures at the edges of night, silent riders who vanished with the dawn. But in Ubar, the towers still gleamed. The fountains still bubbled. The incense still burned. And the rulers still laughed. They dismissed the tales as superstition, nervous talk from tired travelers. After all, wasn't Ubar blessed? Hadn't the city endured drought, war, even plague, and risen higher each time? But the desert sees what pride does not. There were signs. The great well in the city center began to murmur. Its waters, once clear and cool, turned thick and tasted of rust. Birds that had nested along the garden walls vanished, leaving behind empty branches and silence. Strange marks appeared in the sand outside the city spirals, too perfect to be natural, too vast to be made by hand. A priestess, one of the last who still remembered the old rites, approached the city's council and begged for a return to humility, to offer thanks, to quiet the towers and lower the incense. But she was laughed out of the chamber. Her name, they say, has been erased from every tablet. That night a tremor shook the southern wall. Just once. Just enough to crack the stone near the gate. and something inside the earth seemed to stir. No one spoke of it in daylight, but servants whispered in corners. Children cried at night without cause. Dogs refused to cross certain courtyards. A caravan from the east arrived a day late and refused to enter the city. The leader, a man with one milky eye, stared long at the towers and said only, "You built too high." Still Ubar danced. Still the torches burned at night, casting long flickering shadows over marble. Still, the voices of the merchants echoed in the market, though fewer came with each passing moon. And beneath it all, the desert watched. It had been patient. For centuries it had tolerated the towers. But deserts do not forget. They remember. They wait. It didn't begin with fire. There was no invasion, no screaming horns at the gates, no blood spilled on marble. Ubar's fall began with a sound, a low groan, almost like a sigh, that rose from beneath the city in the hour before dawn. At first it was mistaken for wind, but this sound did not come from the dunes. It came from the deep, from beneath the streets and pillars, from under the oldest well, where water had once run freely and now clung like rot to the stone. A merchant sleeping on a rooftop claimed he awoke to feel the building shift beneath him. A watchman swore he saw dust lifting from the flagstones with no feet around. But come morning, everything stood as it always had. The pillars, the walls, the pride. Until the well cracked. A sharp, splintering noise echoed through the city's heart as the stone ring around the central well fractured cleanly in 3 places. Water burst forth for a moment, fierce and black, reeking of minerals and decay. Then it vanished. The well was empty. The priests called it a test. The engineers called it a failure of the earth. But the elders, those few who still remembered stories passed down in tents, fell silent. Their eyes turned toward the dunes. They refused to sleep within the walls again. Over the next days, the earth shifted more. Thin fissures ran through temple floors. Statues leaned ever so slightly. The great incense vault cracked from base to roof, splitting hundreds of clay jars open, releasing the city's scent into the wind in one last offering. And then came the sinkhole. It swallowed an entire courtyard near the southern gate in a single night. No one heard it happen. In the morning, there was simply a vast, empty wound in the earth 20 cubits across and endlessly deep. 4 guards were gone. Not a scream had been heard. Only the soundless vanishing. By now, even Shaddad had begun to doubt. He ordered offerings to be made to gods no one remembered. Silver birds were placed in the gardens. Frankincense was burned not in worship, but in fear. The priestess long exiled was quietly invited back into the inner circle. But it was too late. The desert had already opened its mouth. Beneath Ubar ran a lattice of caverns hollowed out over centuries by underground rivers. With each caravan, each celebration, each tower raised in vanity, the weight of the city had pressed harder on the fragile bones below. And now, they were snapping. One by one, sections of the city groaned, cracked, and gave way. Streets once crowded with laughter collapsed into the void. Foundations shuddered. Towers swayed. Still many stayed. They clung to the illusion that what had always been would always be so. But the sand had already decided otherwise. They say that on the final night, even the stars turned away. It began not with thunder or quake, but with a strange stillness, an unnatural hush that crept into every alley and courtyard of Ubar. The torches, though lit, flickered without wind. The fountains, though broken, seemed to hold their breath. No dogs barked. No birds sang. The sky above was cloudless, yet no stars shone. And in that silence, something shifted. The people of Ubar, once too proud to kneel now, gathered in trembling clusters around the remaining temples. Shaddad himself stood at the highest tower, wrapped in white silk, his gold bands dulled by dust. His voice no longer roared with command, but cracked with wear. He raised his arms not in defiance but in plea. "Return our sky," he whispered, but the sky did not answer. All at once, a deep vibration coursed through the earth, not sharp, but low, like a giant's breath beneath the soil. Buildings groaned. The pillars trembled. And from the fractured well at the city's center, a faint red glow began to rise. It was not fire, it was not light, it was memory. Old ancient memory of water, of greed, of promises unkept, of a city built too tall, too proud, too certain it could never fall. Then came the first scream, a child seeing something move just beyond the edge of the northern wall. Something tall, not quite human, walking silently across the sand. Others saw it too. Shapes. Dozens of them, shadows without bodies, echoes with form. The guards dropped their spears. The silence became unbearable. It was not quiet, it was pressure. Like the very air had grown thick with judgment. People clutched their ears, yet heard no sound. Some collapsed, others ran. But there was nowhere to flee. The southern quarter dropped into the earth in one slow, terrible groan. Marble cracked like eggshells. Statues broke at the knees. The library, filled with scrolls from forgotten kings, vanished in an instant. And then the towers fell, not all at once, but in a chain. Each struck the next, toppling in a slow-motion dance of ruin. The pillars that had once kissed the stars now crumbled into dust. At the last moment, Shaddad remained on his tower's edge, his arms still raised. A thin line of blood ran from his ear. His mouth moved, but no one heard the words. And then silence, true silence, not even wind. When morning came, the dunes had moved. Sand lay smooth, where once there were gates. The sun rose over emptiness. Ubar was gone. Only the desert remained. Watching, remembering. Time does not bury things. People do. After Ubar vanished, the dunes reshaped themselves with quiet grace. The wind erased the last outlines of roads. The sun bleached the fragments of fallen stone. Within a few seasons, the desert had no trace of towers, no whisper of gates, no evidence of anything other than sand. But what truly sealed Ubar's fate was not the earth. It was silence. The caravans stopped coming. The maps redrew themselves, omitting the names that once commanded awe. Traders who once spoke of Ubar in reverence now denied it had ever existed. Even the tales that remained were whispered in half-mockery, as myths, fables, stories told to children to teach humility. And so Ubar faded, not in ruin but in memory. The desert held its secret tightly, but not cruelly, like a grave that no longer bore a name. Only a few remained who claimed to know of its truth, old Bedouin tribes, their oral traditions worn smooth with age. They spoke of a place swallowed for its pride, a city that reached too high, a king who dared to build paradise with mortal hands. But they too aged, they too passed, and with them went the last words in the old tongue that once described Ubar's greatness. Words for its towers, its gardens, its sacred well all lost. Not even the winds could pronounce them now. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell, never knowing they built roads near Ubar's bones. Scholars laughed at the idea of a desert Atlantis. Explorers searched, found nothing, and moved on. But there were signs. In the deepest parts of the empty quarter, compasses spun in circles. Camels refused to move at certain sites. Travelers, lost and delirious, returned with sketches of towers they could not name. Nightmares filled with red light, with wells that whispered, and all with the wind speaking softly, in no language known to man. It was not until the late 20th century, when satellites began to scan the Earth's surface from above, that something unexpected appeared, a faint pattern beneath the sand. A spoke-shaped network, too symmetrical to be natural, too isolated to be modern. Digging began. Hesitantly. And there beneath the dunes, the ruins waited. Collapsed walls, carved stones, the remains of what might once have been a gate, and a well fractured into three. Silent still. The world called it Ubar, but the desert called it nothing. It had already forgotten the name. In 1992, the first shovel struck the sand where no one believed anything waited. A satellite image, grainy, barely conclusive, had revealed an old trade route branching like spokes from a central hub buried deep within the Rub al-Khali. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others, with dust in their eyes and old books in their hands, believed it could be Ubar. But belief is dangerous in archaeology. The team arrived with more hope than caution. Trucks rolled over dunes that had not been touched in 1,000 years. Equipment buzzed. Flags marked grid squares. And beneath meters of sandstone began to show itself. The entrance to a collapsed well. A portion of a wall, smooth, unnatural. Pottery broken, but ornate. Strange blackened resin hardened into the cracks of ancient container frankincense. And in the center of it all, the skeleton of a city with no name. The media called it Atlantis of the Sands. The historians called it the lost city of Ubar. But what they uncovered was not a city. It was a wound, because Ubar had not died from war, not from plague, not even from time. It had fallen straight down. The excavation revealed a sinkhole, vast, treacherous, and gaping. A cavity opened beneath the city's foundations, swallowing entire quarters of buildings into the abyss. And around it the stone bore scorch marks. Not of fire, not of human hands. Something else. The lead archaeologist, an aging man named Dr. Alan Kendrick, documented everything meticulously. He measured the stones. He mapped the collapse. He recorded the impossibility of its precision. But something disturbed him. At night, his journal entries grew erratic. He wrote of dreams of whispering winds, distant songs in a language he did not know, and visions of towers collapsing in reverse stone, climbing upward into sky. On the 12th day, he descended into the sinkhole with a camera and rope. He never came back up. They found the camera. Its footage showed only 30 seconds of stone, then a soft humming, then darkness. The team left quietly after that. No official declaration, no museum displays, just a paragraph in a paper and a few yellowed news clippings. Some called the entire expedition a hoax. Others claimed the sand swallowed it again. But in the years since, strange things have happened near that site. Devices fail. GPS signals distort. Tourists go missing. And every so often a traveler returns from the edge of the empty quarter. Silent, shaken, unable to speak of what they saw. Because maybe what they found wasn't Ubar. Maybe Ubar is still beneath. And maybe it's still listening. The sand is patient. It does not speak often. It does not raise its voice, but it remembers. It remembers the weight of stone, how towers pressed into its skin, like arrogant fingers reaching for heaven. It remembers the hooves of thousands of camels, the footprints of kings, the dragging wheels of treasure carts, heavy with frankincense and ivory. It remembers the moment the ground gave way, not with fury, but with indifference, like a mother letting go of a child too proud to listen. And it remembers the silence that followed, not a silence born from peace, but one forced, pressed down by the weight of things, too ancient, too sacred, too ashamed to be spoken aloud. Long after Ubar vanished, the desert never quite healed. The dunes shifted like restless dreams. Travelers became fewer, and those who crossed the empty quarter did so quickly, never camping near the coordinates where the sand feels heavier. Some scholars theorize that the geomagnetic field in that region is disturbed, that something beneath the Earth's crust interferes with instruments. But locals say otherwise. They say it's the memory, because sand, like old gods, holds grudges. Even now, centuries later, when the moon is low and the wind is thin, some swear they hear something deep beneath the surface. Not voices exactly, not language, but a feeling, like being watched by something ancient, not hostile, not kind, just aware. In some corners of the world, tiny relics attributed to Ubar still exist, jewelry crafted with a style no other culture can claim, fragments of stone etched with symbols no one has translated. They sit in drawers, mislabeled, forgotten. But they hum, quietly, and once in a while, a child will draw a city they've never seen. A round city with 14 towers and a glowing well at the center. When asked where they saw it, they simply shrug. In a dream, they say. In the sand. Because what is forgotten by men's not always lost. Some stories bury themselves to survive, and if you press your ear to the dunes, if you wait very still, you just might hear Ubar whispering back. There is a weight in knowledge, and sometimes it sinks deeper than the thing it seeks to understand. When the ruins of Ubar were rediscovered, there was a brief flicker of triumph. Headlines spoke of validation, of myths made real. The Atlantis of the sands. Found, they said. But the men who went there, the ones who saw the cracks in the ground, who felt the air shift around the broken well, came back changed. Not cursed in the fairy tale sense, not haunted, just quiet. Dr. Kendrick's assistant, the last to leave the site, resigned within a week. He told no stories. He gave no interviews. In his final report, buried in a government archive, he wrote a single line under. Conclusion: some cities are meant to be forgotten. What he meant, what many now understand, is that discovery does not always bring light. Sometimes it only reveals the edges of something too vast, too broken, too old to carry. Ubar was not a tale of tragedy. It was a warning, a story repeated in stone, in cinder, in sand. That greatness built without humility is a tower balanced on breath. That the earth has limits, and when ignored, it remembers. Those who now study Ubar speak in different tones than before, not with wonder, but with caution. The old arrogance of archaeology. The idea that every ruin must be unearthed, every silence broken, is slowly cracking. Because in Ubar, they saw what happens not when a city is lost, but when it is buried on purpose. The curse was never in the sand. It was in the knowing, in pulling memory out of the ground and realizing it wasn't waiting to be found. It was hiding, for good reason. Now Ubar lives again, not in marble or incense, but in the minds of those who cannot unsee. It waits behind the eyes, in dreams, in silence, and sometimes in a brief stillness before sleep they feel it. The sinking, the weight of something beneath them pressing upward. Not to return, just to remind. Ubar was not the only city that fell. Its towers may have collapsed beneath the Arabian dunes, but echoes of its story, its pride, its punishment, its disappearance resurface again and again in myths, scattered like broken pottery across the ancient world. In Mesopotamia, there is the tale of Eridu, a city said to be the first created by gods, where kings reigned for thousands of years before the flood came not of water, but of silence. In the sands of North Africa, the Berbers speak of Zerzura, the oasis of little birds, a white city hidden deep in the desert filled with treasure and watched over by silent guardians with eyes of flame. Those who sought it rarely returned. Those who did whispered of walls too smooth for tools and a stillness that pressed on the chest like a buried truth. Even in the Andes across oceans and time, the Inca told stories of Paititi, a golden city swallowed by the jungle. Not destroyed by war, but hidden by the earth itself. Like Ubar, it vanished not with violence, but with intention. Why does this story repeat? Perhaps it is because every civilization must grapple with its own reflection, and every empire eventually sees in that reflection its end. The tale of Ubar is not singular. It is archetype, a pattern left behind like fingerprints on stone, a warning sewn into human memory across tribes, continents, languages. Build too high, and the sky withdraws. Dig too deep, and the earth forgets you. Some say these cities never existed, that they are metaphors made into myth. But what if they did? What if these scattered legends are not separate, but pieces of the same ruin, a memory shattered by time, retold by different tongues adapted to fit new deserts and new gods? What if Ubar was simply the name given this time, and next time when the towers fall again, it will have another name, another language, another script buried beneath another sky? Because the sand remembers. But it does not call things by name. It speaks in patterns, in shadows, in echoes. And if you listen closely, you'll find that the story never changed. Only the city did. His name was Shaddad, in the stories that survived. He is many things: king builder, tyrant, dreamer. But above all, he is remembered for what he dared to build a paradise on earth, not to honor the gods, but to replace them. Long before the fall, Shaddad ruled Ubar at the height of its power. He was born into wealth and prophecy. The stars, it is said, aligned on the night of his birth. A hawk landed at his window before he spoke his first word. Priests declared him a chosen vessel. But chosen by whom? He inherited a city already rich beyond comprehension, sitting at the crossroads of trade, pulsing with gold, incense, and salt. But Shaddad did not want to rule a city. He wanted to create a legend. He commissioned a project that would span decades, the construction of a city so perfect it would rival heaven. Gardens floated over rooftops. Walls were inlaid with mother of pearl. Fountains sang in precise harmony. He imported trees from the east, birds from the Nile, and marble from mountains no man could name. And in the center of it all, a great hall, crowned with a dome that reflected starlight, even when clouds covered the sky. Shaddad named it Iram al-Imad Iram of the Pillars. He declared it a city not of man, but of eternity. His scribes wrote laws in a tongue only he could speak. His court poets sang of how even the sun paused above Ubar to admire its beauty. And when a prophet passed through and warned of divine anger, Shaddad did not listen. He built the towers higher, but hubris never stands alone. It festers in those around power. The architects who feared disobedience, the advisors who translated silence as approval, the citizens who dared not doubt. And so the city rose not in glory, but in denial. Deep below the aquifers weakened. The well shuddered. The stones began to shift. But Shaddad kept building. There's a story never verified, always whispered that in the final days, Shaddad dreamed of walking through his city with wings made of brass, looking down upon his people like a god. And when he awoke, he ordered a statue of himself placed above the central gate. Arms open, wide eyes of obsidian, staring forever into the horizon. A gate to paradise guarded by the man who made it. But paradise cannot be forced, and gods, even the silent ones, do not take kindly to being replaced. Shaddad was last seen standing atop the tallest tower, watching the dunes shift unnaturally in the distance. Some say he prayed. Others say he smiled. A few say he stepped off the edge before the tower crumbled beneath him, not as a fall, but as a final declaration. If I cannot rule heaven, then let me be buried beneath it. His name echoes like a cracked bell Shaddad, a name spoken with reverence by some, dread by others, and forgotten by most. But in the bones of the desert where the sand lies too still, his legacy whispers on. Shaddad was not merely a king. He was a builder of myths, a weaver of dreams too large for the earth to hold. Born into the royal line of the tribe of Ad, his arrival was heralded by omens, red sky at dawn, the silence of birds, a well that overflowed without rain. Priests marked his forehead with oil and ash, proclaiming him touched by the divine. But no one asked which divine. He grew in opulence, but also in vision. Where others ruled, Shaddad envisioned. Where others feared the gods, he challenged them. He did not want to be remembered. He wanted to be worshipped. Under his decree, Ubar transformed. No longer merely a hub for trade, it became an altar to excess. Shaddad summoned stonemasons from the far north, goldsmiths from beyond the Nile, and scholars who spoke dead languages. He ordered a paradise built from the ground up, not in honor of heaven, but in mockery of it. Gardens bloomed where there should have been only dust. Fountains gushed with perfumed water, while the outer villages withered. At the city's center rose the 14 pillars, each carved from a single slab of white stone, polished until they gleamed under starlight. They towered above all else, not for defense, but as a statement. Nothing above us, nothing but sky. And above it all, atop the great dome, stood a statue of Shaddad, himself, arms wide, eyes cast downward, watching his people as a god might gaze upon his creation. But what he could not see from that height was the cracking beneath. The well groaned. The stones shifted. The old priestesses warned him in hushed tones. Lower your gaze, or the sand will rise to meet it. He dismissed them all, called them relics, called them fearful, and in the final years his obsession deepened. He no longer sat in council. He walked the halls of marble alone, speaking to invisible architects. He drew impossible map circles within circles' gates, without entry towers taller than breath. Some say he believed he had already died, and that Ubar was his afterlife constructed brick by brick to house his eternal soul. Others say he knew it would fall, and he wanted it that way. as if by burying his city under time and sand, he could ensure that no one ever outshined him again, that his paradise would sleep until the end of days. The last time he was seen, he stood atop the highest of the pillars, not the tower, but the pillar, barefoot, his robes, billowing arms lifted not in prayer, but in triumph. Then came the quake, and the desert was silent. Shaddad was never found. Not his bones, not his crown, not even his shadow. But sometimes, when storms tear through the Rub al-Khali, exposing stone, for a breathless instant, travelers swear they see it, a statue half buried with arms stretched wide, and eyes that still look down. Some cities vanish, others wait. For centuries, the world believed Ubar was a myth, a story told to frighten rulers who grew too proud, a parable tucked into the Quran, a name scribbled in margins of old maps, circled and crossed out. Forgotten. But forgotten things don't stay buried. Not when they are still breathing. There have been reports, isolated, dismissed, of strange phenomena in the Rub al-Khali. Not from storytellers or mystics, but from soldiers, geologists, satellite technicians. They speak of heat patterns beneath the dunes, pulsing in rhythmic intervals, as if something were moving not fast, but slowly, like the heartbeat of stone, as if a city beneath the sand was not still. In 2003, a small team of oil surveyors recorded subsonic vibrations near the coordinates of the so-called Lost Ubar dig. Not tremors, not natural movement, but pulses, for then silence, then for again a pattern. They abandoned the site without filing a full report. In 2011, a satellite imaging firm leaked a false color composite of the empty quarter. It showed a circular distortion, a faint but visible ripple in the sand half a mile wide. The photo was removed within days. The company issued no comment, but the story spread. And with it, the dream returned. People began to report visions. Not nightmares, but memories that didn't belong to them. Dreams of walking along white stone roads, of towers in moonlight, of a red-lit well whispering in a language they could not name yet somehow understood. Some woke with sand on their skin. Others found etched patterns in the condensation of their windows' spirals, perfect and cold. They call it the Ubar pulse now, a theory on the fringes of archaeology and fringe science alike, that the collapse of Ubar did not destroy it, but sealed something inside. That Ubar is not dead, but dormant. Its architecture alive in a way we do not understand. Its memory aware. There's even a term in local dialects, nafas al-rimal, the breath of the sand. The Bedouin will not sleep near it. They do not point. They do not speak its name, not out of fear, out of respect, as one gives to something still listening. Because if Ubar breathes, it means it dreams. And what does a city dream of buried in silence for 1,000 years? Return revenge, or simply to be left alone? No one knows. But on the stillest nights with no moon and no wind, the sand shifts ever so slightly, as if exhaling. He was not a believer. He traced lines, not legends. His name was Émile Dervaux, a quiet cartographer from Marseille, contracted by an international mapping agency to chart heat distortion zones in the Arabian Peninsula. To him, deserts were numbers, elevations, vectors, nothing more. In 2016, Émile was sent to update the topographic overlays of the Rub al-Khali. It was a routine assignment. 3 weeks, 2 drones, solar tents, and silence. The desert, he once joked, was the only place his phone couldn't ring. But that silence didn't feel empty. Not this time. On the 3rd day, one of his drones failed. It fell not abruptly, but gently, as if something had caught it in mid-air and laid it down. When Emil retrieved the device, he found the lens had been etched with a faint spiral. He assumed it was static damage. He logged it. He moved on. On the 7th day, he noticed the horizon had shifted. Not the dunes, not the sky, but something just beyond vision. A faint gleam, white and sharp, like a sliver of polished stone catching sunlight. He marked it on his tablet and labeled it Enam 37A, a meaningless tag. A placeholder. But that night he dreamed. He stood in a vast courtyard of smooth marble. The sky above him was red and motionless. 14 pillars loomed, and at their center a well glowed faintly. Not with light, but with memory. Something looked up from inside it. He woke with his hands trembling. His tablet screen had glitched. The entire map had shifted. Ever so slightly, every point pulled inward toward the coordinate he'd labeled 37A. He tried to correct it. He couldn't. He redrew the lines. They bent again. Coordinates that should have marked wind-carved dunes now sat atop something else. Something circular, layered, concentric, like a city plant pressed beneath sand. Emil didn't sleep the next night. He opened old expedition logs. He pulled satellite archives from the 1990s. He found fragments, all faint, all dismissed, showing the same pattern. Always there, always moving, as if it didn't want to be found, but couldn't help being remembered. And then without warning, his equipment failed. Every device, every backup. But his compass didn't. It spun, not wildly, not fast. Just a slow, endless rotation, as if pointing everywhere, or nowhere, or inward. Emil left that night. He did not report his findings. He did not finish the map. Back in France, he resigned without explanation. He keeps a copy of the final image he saved. Grainy, distorted, imperfect. But when you stare at it long enough, the lines begin to pulse. He's never shown it publicly. But sometimes in interviews, when asked why he stopped his work, he says quietly, "I didn't lose the city. I almost gave it back." There is no official road to Ubar, no signposts in the sand, no GPS pin that won't vanish. The maps are vague. The coordinates conflict. The old routes, once carved by camel and salt and sun, are long erased. And yet some find their way. They don't all begin with intention. Some are researchers. Some are wanderers. A few are dreamers, not in the poetic sense, but in the literal. They wake with the imprint of a route in their minds. A path carved into darkness, always turning left, always circling inward. They call it the Whispering Path, a name first recorded in the notebook of an Egyptian linguist who never returned. He'd scrawled it in 6 languages across the final page of his journal, all versions of the same phrase, the path that calls you by name, though you've never spoken it. The path is not marked by stones or stars, but by absence, campfires that go cold too quickly, dunes that remain unchanged after windstorms, the occasional bleached tooth or sandal strap caught in the edge of a dune facing the wrong way toward the desert's hollow center. Those who follow it say they never meant to, that it felt like walking downhill even on level sand, that each step grew quieter even as their heartbeat grew louder. The Bedouin won't speak of it. but their children sometimes draw it in the sand, a spiral, like a sleeping serpent with an open eye in the middle. When asked where they saw it, they shrug. I just know. The few who claim to have made the journey speak of things that don't stay still. A tower glimpsed in the corner of vision, then gone. A red shimmer just beneath the surface. A voice behind the wind, not speaking. Just waiting. And then? Nothing. Because none of them ever reach a destination. Not one. They always return. But never the same way. Never whole. Some walk out dazed, unable to speak for days. Others return with sand-encrusted journals, filled with maps that loop on themselves endlessly. One woman, a historian from Istanbul, came back barefoot with salt dried into the shape of a city around her ankles. She has not spoken since, but she draws, every day. A circular city, always from above, 14 towers, a single well, and a path spiraling inward, always inward, as if the city is still pulling. Some believe the whispering path is not a route, but a filter, that the desert tests those who dare to listen. And only those already marked will hear the call. But the call is growing louder. More people dream of it now. More lines in the sand that cannot be erased. And in satellite images, strange shadows appear not on the ground but beneath it, as if something is not just calling, but approaching. No one knows when Ubar was built. No one knows when it fell. The dates do not agree. The artifacts contradict each other. Carbon samples return confused results, as if time itself refuses to pin Ubar down. Some stones say 3rd century BCE. Others whisper 5th century AD. One cracked seal found in the southern well bears a script not yet deciphered. Though parts of it match both Akkadian and Old South Arabian tongues, separated by a millennium, it is as though Ubar was not part of time, but outside of it, a city caught in a slow breath between eras, always on the verge of being, always on the edge of vanishing. This is why it returns in dreams, why children draw it before they are taught, why cartographers sketch spirals into blank maps, why desert winds pause near its last known coordinates. Because Ubar is not just a place, it is a memory of human pride, a monument to our desire to build paradise with mortal hands, a warning carved not into stone, but into the part of our minds that remembers what our tongues have forgotten. It lives wherever there is silence, where people build too high, where warnings are ignored, where wells run dry. And so Ubar is never truly lost, because it is always waiting for the next version of itself. It has many names, it will have more, and each time it returns, it will wear a different face. A city of marble, or glass, or steel, a monument to ambition, a grave of arrogance. And then the desert will rise again, or the ocean, or the sky, and it will vanish. Again and again, until we remember not just the story, but the reason it keeps being told. Because some cities are not built to last, some are built to teach, and Ubar, buried deep beneath the sand, still teaches, still waits, still breathes.